we'll do a quick introduction. I'll let Chris introduce himself first.
Okay, thank you. A lot of you know me. I was described, I think, complimentarily last year as an industry veteran, so I've got the grey hair. But I've been in this business for 20 plus years. I'm head up distribution for ArgenX, which is a biotech, fastest growing biotech, in fact. And despite some of the recent turbulence on the stock market and everything else, we've grown from 0 to being a 40 billion company in the space of 18 years. So, and we continue to grow. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to be very relevant for us to help that growth continuing. Over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. My name is Kurnar Kamoni. I'm the CEO and founder of Tive. I started Tive almost 11 years ago in June. And we're growing quite fast too. We grow 50% every single year. We have more than 1,200 customers. But I'm very excited to talk to Chris today, who's one of our customers, and look into the future of where visibility is going. So maybe, Chris, what we're going to do is just a Q&A session. We have a couple of slides, nothing to bore you. But if you think of real-time tracking, if you think of supply chain and logistics and life sciences, it's quite stakes are very high. And throughout the journey for the last 18 years, where would you say, especially in the last few years, where would you say the biggest visibility challenges are today?
I think we've come a long way in that period of time, and probably one of the biggest since I came into the industry, probably in this area. Probably the biggest single change has been real-time information. Before, it used to fascinate me that companies would spend millions of dollars on manufacturing processes, then ship it out the door and be reliant on a $10 temp tail. And then they wonder why it went wrong. Because they had no knowledge of it having gone wrong until the product arrived at its destination. Now, we've got the opportunity, obviously with partners and so on throughout the chain, to take remedial action. If there is a temperature excursion, which is the obvious one, or indeed any other thing, and it links to the other things which are critical to us, such as security, which is often overlooked. It is about an end-to-end process, and this is critical for us in supporting that. Now, as you can imagine, as a small biotech, we've expanded rapidly. We've got new lanes. We've got new markets we're going into. This kind of technology is critical to facilitate that. Without that, we're running in blind. And it's critical for us that we've got reliable partners who can give us both the technology, but also the support in order to make that technology work for us.
Yeah, thank you. And if you think of today, let's say you're starting a project, you're starting new lanes, you're starting new products, where would you all say that visibility gaps are the most prominent? Is it more around operations? Is it in which area of supply chain and logistics you get biggest visibility gaps when you're starting a new project?
It tends to be operations focused, if we're brutal about it. A lot depends upon lane and the complexity of things associated with that, of course. But there are some obvious gaps. The key one traditionally was always how it's being handled in an airport. You can see that, and then suddenly it's disappeared because it's either been loaded into an aircraft that's hence in the air. But I think the key for us is being able to manage those step by step all the way through that process, and that for us is critical. Obviously, developments such as the cloud have enabled us to have that a much more cohesive relationship with things like our distributors. So when it arrives, they can download the data. We can look at that because we're in this together, and it's something that I think has been a development in the last few years that was never there before.
Yeah. I'll show a little screenshot here and some of the shipments, and we'll loop in through this slide and then the next slide. Yep. But if you compare passive, as you mentioned, in past 18 years, and now maybe in the last 2 years, we've gone to more real time, what would you say the benefits like clear? I think you mentioned some, but maybe you can describe them a little bit more. I know there's a difference. Maybe it's $10 versus $50, maybe it's $10 versus $40. But I believe that difference pays for itself quite a bit. Maybe you can touch on that a little bit.
Yes, it does. I mean, obviously, we are not, we're a biotech, so we're not a GSK, we're not a Sanofi. We're also not a generics medicine producer. So guess what? Our shipments tend to have, even if they're very small, tend to have extremely high value. So the idea that we're going to be concerned about spending an extra 40, 50 bucks to have something that's real time and gives us the information we need, clearly we're going to do that. And I think there's another aspect as well. There is often a focus on the dollar or euro value of a particular shipment to justify things. But if we look at us, and I speak for having worked for 2 or 3 other biotechs, and it was the same situation there, is you can look at something like an API shipment, which perhaps in its dollar value isn't as great as commercial goods. But if there's something goes wrong with that shipment, we suddenly have a major problem because we're going to miss our production. And given that we outsource our production, it's impossible to retrieve that back. We're not somebody like GSK with different production facilities who can chop and change and switch production. We lose it. And for us, that would be a critical business loss.
Absolutely. So I think it's not always just about temperature.
Yeah.
You can make so many decisions based on location, based on what's happening in real time. Is somebody tampering with the product because of light alerts? Here, some of the things we're showing here is a smart route deviation alert, which automatically tells you if something deviates from the route, which is very cool. And you can just put a shipment from point A to point B, and if it deviates, you don't have to draw the routes like you used to do in the past. It uses data science and machine learning to figure out those routes. Yeah. But the goal is to be proactive. And if you think of where ArgenX is going, with the advent of artificial intelligence and automation, what are some areas that you guys are investing to make things a little bit more autonomous as the world evolves?
I mean, let's face it, this conference is going to have an awful lot on AI.
Yes.
And some of the streams are going to be very ethereal, very vague, and all marvelous, and so on. I'm a very pragmatic, practical person, and bluntly, and I think we all need to ask that question of, bluntly, what's in it for us? What's in it for me in terms of how we can apply this? And I think one of the key things that AI will give us is that predictability about, for example, going back to the first thing we talked about, a new market, new lane. What are you going to do? How are you going to go about it? This is the kind of thing where that's going to really help us do that predictive analysis up front. And that's something that before used to be a bit of word of mouth, bit of finger in the air, a little bit of a spreadsheet, maybe talk to a few people, but it didn't really go beyond that. And to your point, very little of it was data-backed in terms of that decision-making that came with that. We now have the opportunity to pull all that in and make sure that it's a decision based upon that predictive data.
Yes, and one of the things that we're showing here is workflow automation. So now there's a lot of what happens and I think the previous speaker, Jeff, did a great job talking and showcasing PackSafe on some of the things that they've been able to automate. But what happens in real time as the shipment's going on, there's a lot of customers in pharma and logistics service providers that do a lot of manual work today. They're still looking at the alerts. They're still looking at all what's happening. They're still manually following SOPs. And what you can do now is create these workflows that you can automate, well, based on a particular location, based on these triggers, based on this particular temperature profile, based on this product SKU, do this decision. Maybe do an agentic call, maybe send an email to somebody, maybe Slack somebody, maybe WhatsApp somebody, maybe make a voice agent call based on all those various parameters. But when people today, what they do is they look at manually, did it meet this criteria A, B, and C? Oh, now it's A, B, C, let me do this action. But now we can build these workflows, which then connect to artificial intelligence and can automate quite a bit of things. But the truth at the end has to do with when rubber meets the road, it has to do with data quality. What would you say, Chris, how important is data quality as we continue to evolve in this journey?
Well, I think building on also what the last speaker was talking about, I mean, I've been in this industry for a long time. one of the things that fascinates me about our industry compared with others is we're very data rich. But the big failing of that is we might be data rich, but we're not well data organized or validated. So we have to cut out the noise and focus on the data that we have that is reliable and supportive to what we're trying to do. And that's not an easy ask. I know some people in the room will be from big pharma, and I know several of big pharma companies are spending a fortune on what they can call it different projects. They could, I mean, I've heard one being, say, it's about getting ready for AI. But actually what they're doing is a massive data cleanup operation. It sounds dull, it sounds boring, but nevertheless, it's critically important, because if you've got data that's incorrect, you're going to make wrong decisions. Simple as that.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing, there's many providers. I think even I'm gonna. Is Jeff still in the room? Probably not. Jeff was just talking about, like, they looked at many different types of loggers and different types of trackers, and they realized the quality is not the same. They were pinging at a different rate. The quality of data was not the same, and when that happens, the decisions can be quite wrong. And one of the things that we built is this thing called reefer cycle detection, which we can detect if a trailer is running cyclical and somebody's turning it on and off to save money, or it's continuous because you guys paid the carrier and 3PL to run on a continuous temperature. And because we have very high quality data, and because the data science and machine learning team were able to automatically detect that and provide that as an alert, but only comes from the quality of the data, which there's a lot of work that goes there, because sometimes the wrong location leads you to just spending an hour hunting something that's not there at all. So what I want to ask you one more question, and I actually want to open up to Q&A. So think about some questions you guys can ask me and Chris, more Chris than me. But if somebody wants to start a pilot, start in this journey and see how they can automate their supply chains, how they can get more data out of real time, become more actionable around real-time data, what would you suggest they do? Where would they start?
That's a huge question, and I think a lot depends upon the maturity of your organization, and people underestimate the power of that. You know, I've worked in big pharma. There's plenty of resource to be able to set these things up and manage that. If you're at the other end of the scale at a small biotech, guess what? You are on your own, and you're heavily reliant on partners who will be able to come with you on that journey. So that is a crucial factor as how you would approach that. For us, it's very much about approaching that with our partners and providers, such as yourselves, in order to bring that whole together. Because we're in this journey, as you put it, together. It's not something where you're going one way, we're going the other. It has to be a unified approach to that. If not, it will fail. Simple as that.
That's a good point. And we look at this journey as design partners. And if people are open to design partnerships here, we're open to building products specifically that kind of are part of your journey. And we've worked quite a bit together with you, Chris. So thank you for that. Maybe we open up to some questions if anybody asks. I know we have another 4 minutes left. Yes?
I'll just speak out loud.
That's okay.
In your headline, it says that you reduce damages by using real-time visibility. Can you give an example of how?
I won't go into specifics, but as you can imagine, the key is with that real-time data, with our partners, I might add, service providers and so on, is it gives us that opportunity to take remedial action. So in a couple of examples, and I can give you much more detail outside the conference room. One was a significant temperature excursion, where obviously there was the trigger, the alert, remedial action was taken, the product was saved. Another one was related to where there had been, in fact, some physical damage with the goods, unfortunate occurrence, there'd been a handling damage. And then the key action was, what about the rest? Is it, example, just a couple of units, or is it something much? What action do we need to take? And we were able to do that, establish that the rest of the goods were fine, and they could continue on their journey to the destination. So it's something that there isn't a kind of a prescriptive things that's happened, therefore we do X exclusively, although that is part of it. It's very much about identify what's happened and take the remedial action. And we can do that remotely, of course, with the relevant alerts and the information to back that up.
Yeah, I'll just double down on that. There's many cases beyond ArgenX where shipments are left on a tarmac and we get an alert, and customers, whether we're monitoring for them 24/7 or they're monitoring, they take immediate action. They work with a carrier, they work with a logistics service provider to make sure that that goes in a cold storage or gets in the plane as soon as possible before then it's damaged. Anyone else?
And to that point, I might add, we've had a situation where there was a temperature excursion and the product continued its journey, but from the data we'd got, our QA were able to establish that the product was still usable, and therefore by the time it arrived, we already had the answer because in the old days, it would have arrived at its destination, there would have been,
an alarm.
An alarm, what do we do? But we're ahead of the game because by the time the product had arrived, our QA had already been on it and had established that it was okay, and we're able to message the recipient to say, these goods are good to go.
Yeah, similar to what Jeff said, right? There was so much time wasted on people looking at the tracker, there's an alarm there, and now there's a chain of events. And during that chain, maybe that's when the real temperature excursion happening, because somebody's talking to somebody, that thing is sitting in a place that it shouldn't be, whereas now you know immediately that it's okay based on the QA team and you can release it. We have more time, so feel free, and there's no stupid questions. Yes?
Just a question for Chris, really. When you're building the business case for kind of transitioning to these types of devices, is it a discussion that you have with procurement and with the finance team about what the cost of not doing versus the cost of doing? How does that discussion go?
It's a good point. If I was in big pharma, I'd have told you we would have had the discussion with finance, we'd have had the discussion with procurement and all the other stakeholders. If you can call it that, one of the joys of a biotech, and being a small biotech, you can make the decision that with the stakeholders there and do it. As we surmised before, as you can imagine, somebody says it within the ArgenX world, hey, guess what, this shipment, the loggers are no longer going to cost you $12, it's going to be $80, $90. Do you know what my response is going to be? And with the support of our finance colleagues and so on, we don't care, because the shipment value is hundreds of thousands. So it's just irrelevant. Now, having worked in big pharma where there was a large generics business, you can imagine that was a very different type of conversation with those stakeholders, and it tended obviously to be a much clunkier decision-making process and therefore quite challenging to get done. But nevertheless, with that, interestingly, one of the things that even in big pharma, but certainly for us, was always, if you like, the killer in terms of closing that decision-making process was the insurance aspect. Because bluntly, yes, we've got a comprehensive insurance policy, but you can imagine the fees that we pay given the hundreds of millions of dollars worth of product we're shipping. And if somebody says, well, actually, you've had only this number of excursions compared with before where you had this number, they're a bunch of happy bunnies. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Maybe we can do one more. Somebody has one.
You obviously wowed them.
No, I think you did. Both of us. Anybody? One more? I think we're good. Then it's 0-0. So thank you.
Thank you for your time, everybody.